Hey everybody, happy July 4th. Praise God. Happy birthday to America. I'm so grateful to my parents that brought me here from the Soviet Union when I was just 4 years old. I love this country. I'm so grateful for it. And today I have on a constitutional attorney who's going to teach us more about the Constitution, some facts that you maybe don't know about. Her name is KrisAnne Hall. She's been teaching for over 12 years, traveling the country, teaching sheriffs, policemen, congressmen, and women about the Constitution, educating them on their rights and how to safely and constitutionally protect their community. But before I have her on, I want to say a quick thank you to the sponsor of this video, Noble Gold. Thank you for sponsoring this channel. And also, if you're looking to what to do with your fiat currency that just keeps getting destroyed with inflation and the stock market, definitely check out gold and silver. I have some, and it is a great place to put your money. So check them out at noblegoldinvestments.com. So you actually have done a lot of research, obviously, in the Constitution. You have said before that really the Constitution Day, our Independence Day, is really on July 2nd. Can you explain that history for us?
Sure. So we teach this history at libertyfirstsociety.com. And it's really a very interesting, but also very important history. Our Independence Day is not actually, the actual Independence Day is not July 4th, but July 2nd. July 2nd, 1776, is the day that the First Continental Congress debated, voted, and ratified into law the Lee Resolution. Now, the Lee Resolution was a three-step process to becoming both legally and politically separated from Great Britain. And then on July 2nd, they debated, they voted, they ratified the Lee Resolution into law, creating a legal separation, a political separation from the Kingdom of Great Britain. And what they did as the Continental Congress was a legally binding act, just as legally binding as anything that our Congress does today. That's based in the Constitution. And we know that this is Independence Day because John Adams, who was part of that First Continental Congress, he wrote a letter home to his wife Abigail on July 3rd, 1776, in which he stated that July 2nd will be an epic day in American history where we will celebrate our independence forevermore. And then he gave a whole list of things that he anticipated we would be doing today to celebrate independence on July 2nd, 1776. And it wasn't actually until 1768, when the federal government declared July 4th to be Independence Day.
Interesting history. Speaking of history, there have really been some groundbreaking Supreme Court decisions in this country. Four recently as well. I mean, really amazing cases, especially the last one with the EPA, West Virginia versus the EPA. I wanted to talk about some of the cases and what your perspective is as a constitutional attorney with these last cases.
Well, this has been a pretty monumental session for the Supreme Court because we're watching the Supreme Court as a majority start to return its focus back on state power. And that's really important because our constitutional republic was actually built on the understanding that the states would be an important check and balance on federal power, that the power that's not specifically enumerated as a delegated power to the federal government would be reserved to the states. As a matter of fact, James Madison wrote in Federalist 45 that the powers delegated by the proposed Constitution to the federal government are few and defined. We actually wrote the Constitution in such a way that it put the federal government into a few and defined box. He said the powers that will remain in the states are numerous and indefinite. And that is further codified by the 10th Amendment, which says that the powers not delegated to the United States are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. And it's a very interesting trend now in this court to start recognizing once again that the Constitution doesn't give the federal government this unlimited dream team amount of power, and that a lot of the power is reserved to the states. And that's where we get this understanding of the Supreme Court overturning Roe v. Wade, and part of the justification for the EPA case as well.
Do you know of any other cases that the Supreme Court has taken up? I heard they're taking up an election case as well. What are your thoughts on some of the cases maybe coming down the pike that we might expect from the Supreme Court?
Well, there's another really important case that they've just decided as well. And that, I don't know if you remember, Anna, but there was a football coach that was praying on the field.
Yes.
And after the games, and the Supreme Court said that that was not a violation of separation of church and state, not a violation of the Establishment Clause in the First Amendment for that football coach at the government school to pray on the field after the game. And it's really interesting, the distinction that we should, take as obvious, but the Supreme Court had to point out for the school that when a teacher is not actually in the classroom, when the event is over, and the teacher is not compelling the students to pray, it becomes a voluntary thing for the students, that is not a violation. Only when the teachers are in the classroom directing prayer or directing prayer over an intercom at a government school does that become a problem. Prayer, I know a lot of people always say we need to get prayer back in the schools, but the interesting thing is that prayer is not outlawed in schools. Students can pray, students can have Bible studies, students can even witness to their classmates and give them gospel tracts. They can wear, worship wear clothes. If the school allows them to wear Superman or a rock band, then they have to be allowed to wear worship wear as well. So the reason that our students don't pray in the schools, the reason why there aren't more student-led Bible studies, I believe, is because many of the parents, Christian parents who send their children to government schools, simply don't know what their child's rights are in the school. And now this Supreme Court opinion actually reinforces the teacher's right to pray and to have religious conversations on their own time, things that don't involve the children.
As a constitutional attorney and as a Christian, how do you respond to people when they say, get your church out of the government? There's a separation of church and state. What is your response to that?
The only way you can say that is if you really don't understand what that phrase separation of church and state actually means. And it's not unusual to have that misunderstanding because we don't teach that principle correctly. I heard a female member of Congress say just recently that separation of church and state isn't in the Constitution. It's just a stinking letter. And in reality, what we miss, even conservative Christians, what we miss is that, yes, separation of church and state is in the Constitution because it is the most essential underlying principle behind the First Amendment. You don't have religious liberty without the proper application of separation of church and state. And so what we have to understand, I have a whole religious liberty course that I teach on libertyfirstsociety.com. My husband has another course that teaches the church's role in government on libertyfirstsociety.com. And what we show you is the history of that, understanding that principle, separation of church and state, which since the year 1100, Separation of church and state has always meant that government has no business influencing or controlling your church. It is only since our most recent bout into educated ignorance that the American people have come to believe that separation of church and state means that God has no business in public discussion and people in government can't make decisions according to their faith and their morality. So we're teaching it backwards, and we're having some very disastrous consequences for that. Like I said, many Christians don't understand that you're supposed to operate where government isn't in your church. And not only that, separation of church and state is actually is a two-sided coin. Yes, the government is not supposed to be influencing your church, but the greatest mechanism of protection of religious liberty in the principle of separation of church and state is the knowledge of the church and the Christian to keep government out of the church and government out of their lives, which means we have to have churches that don't take government grant money. We have to have Christian schools that do not take government grant money, that do not take government tax vouchers, because it's the money that seeps into the church, seeps into the Christian school, that allows the government influence and control over your church and your school. And that is the violation of separation of church and state.
That's right. And it was a letter that Thomas Jefferson wrote to the Baptist church, like you just described.
Yes, right. So it was 1802. Thomas Jefferson wrote a letter to the Danbury Baptists. What's really missing in our history of that is that Jefferson didn't wake up one morning with the random thought, I think I'll sit down and write the Baptists a letter. Jefferson was actually responding to a letter that the Danbury Baptists had written to him. Jefferson had just been elected president of the United States. The Danbury Baptists had supported his election, endorsed his election, and they were just writing him and letting him know, hey, now that you're president, we were happy to endorse you. We were happy that you're president. But now that you're president, we just want to make sure that what you did before being president, what you did to cause us to trust you, is not going to change now that you are president. And Thomas Jefferson was reassuring them, no, my stand on religious liberty is exactly the same. And I assure you that I will not change as president of the United States, because I respect, he says, what the whole body of the people did by establishing that the legislature shall not establish religion or prohibit the free exercise in thereof, thus building a wall of separation between church and state. And you know, Anna, what's really interesting is that thing that Jefferson did to make the Danbury Baptists actually support him. And that was just shortly after the ratification of our Constitution. Some legislators got together to try to pass a bill to use tax dollars to pay Christian teachers to teach the Christian religion. And Thomas Jefferson and James Madison as well were vehemently opposed to using tax dollars to fund religious education. Jefferson wrote an entire remonstrance for the state of Kentucky against this bill, and the bill ultimately failed. And the Danbury Baptists were also opposed to this bill because they knew if the government was funding religious education, that would be the end of religious liberty. And they explained it very simply. They said that it would be repugnant to the spirit of the gospel for the legislators to proceed in matters of religion. So who pays the ticket dictates the lessons. They said if they are allowed to do this, it won't be long before the government dictates who can preach, what can be preached, and how they will preach it. Because who pays the piper dictates the tune.
So you travel across the country and you educate a lot of sheriffs, a lot of policemen as well. What is one of the biggest misconceptions that you see when you are teaching American history and the Constitution that sheriffs are protecting or supposed to protect their community? What is one of the things that you've noticed the most that they're maybe not aware of that you end up teaching them?
Well, there's actually two things I think that are very important. Number one is that there is a separation of power, that is an essential check and balance between the states and the federal government. And the sheriffs and those who take the oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of their state have an absolute essential role as that check and balance from overreaching federal power. And then the second thing that I would say they don't really know or understand is that our sheriffs, our deputies, are not to be blind enforcers of the law. Our sheriffs are not hirelings of the governor. They don't work for the county. They are constitutionally established representatives of the people who specifically take that oath. I do solemnly swear I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of my state. In that promise to the people, they're actually promising that they will not enforce a law, an order, or an ordinance that is contrary to those constitutions. So where many sheriffs are taught that they're not allowed to be a judge of the law, their oath and their duty and their responsibility to the people who have put them in office says quite the opposite. And it's what we're seeing all across America. This awakening of the wisdom of the sheriffs. We have taught this. It is a 3-hour course. I have taught this to representatives of every sheriff, of every state in the union, a sheriff, at least one out of every state. Some I've taught the entire states. I even taught a conference at the Western Sheriffs Association conference where I taught the sheriffs of 17 states all at one time in a 3-hour conference setting. And it's amazing to see the sheriffs that are standing up. We have there's a sheriff in Chavez County, New Mexico, that refused to allow anyone to enforce the governor's shutdowns and lockdowns of their businesses over COVID. There's a sheriff in Indiana who told the USDA and the FDA that if you raid my Amish farmers without coming and getting my permission first, I'm going to arrest your USDA. I'm going to arrest your FDA agents for trespassing, and you will have to bail them out of our jails. And this is something that is a great awakening in the sheriffs around America, that they are the defenders of the rights of the people and not blind enforcers of the law. And we actually, Anna, have a documentary that's going to be released in October that is based on this course and the testimony of these sheriffs that are standing up for the rights of the people based on the proper understanding. And you can go watch the trailer to that documentary at NonCompliantMovie.com.
Yes, NonCompliantMovie.com. KrisAnne, thank you so much for serving this amazing country. You really do so much. You're always traveling. I know you're more you're kind of more home now, but you've been traveling the last 7 years. You said 4 to 5 days you were at home per month.
Yeah, we've actually been traveling for about 12 years, and 7 of those years I averaged 260 meetings in 22 states every single year.
Wow. Well, we need to learn about our Constitution. So thank you so much for serving this great country and educating our sheriffs and everyone else. You guys can go check her out on KrisAnneHall.com. Also, sign up and go enroll in her class on the Constitution at Liberty First Society. It is a great program. She's an amazing woman of God, and you will learn so much. This is her website as well, KrisAnne Hall and Liberty First Society. Go check her out. My internet's a little slow, but happy July 4th, everybody. We wish you a blessed time with your family. We give God all the glory. This is one nation under God, indivisible. In Jesus' name. KrisAnne, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
And check out this video by Paul Harvey. He gives you a little bit more detail than most probably know about the men who signed the Declaration of Independence. A lot of things I didn't even know myself. You know, a lot of men gave up a lot to fight for this country. So we want to honor them. Bye, guys. Happy July 4th. Watch this.
I want to play this clip for you right now just so you could see what the Founding Fathers actually went through so you could actually sit here today and actually be free. Let's roll this.
And here is the documented fate of that gallant 56. Carter Braxton of Virginia, wealthy planter, trader, saw his ships swept from the seas. To pay his debts, he lost his home and all of his properties and died in rags. Thomas Lynch Jr., who signed that pledge, was a third-generation rice grower, aristocrat, large plantation owner. After he signed, his health failed. His wife and he set out for France to regain his failing health. Their ship never got to France, was never heard from again. Thomas McKean of Delaware was so harassed by the enemy that he was forced to move his family 5 times in 5 months. He served in Congress without pay, his family in poverty and in hiding. Vandals looted the properties of Ellery and Clymer and Hall and Gwinnett and Walton and Hayward and Rutledge and Middleton. Thomas Nelson Jr. of Virginia raised $2 million on his own signature to provision our allies, the French fleet. After the war, he personally paid back the loans, wiped out his entire estate, and he was never reimbursed by his government. In the final battle for Yorktown, he, Nelson, urged General Washington to fire on his, Nelson's, own home, which was occupied by Cornwallis. It was destroyed. Thomas Nelson Jr. had pledged his life, his fortune, and his sacred honor. The Hessians seized the home of Frances Hopkinson of New Jersey. Francis Lewis had his home and everything destroyed, his wife imprisoned. She died within a few months. Richard Stockton, who signed that declaration, was captured, mistreated, his health broken to the extent that he died at 51. His estate was pillaged. Thomas Hayward Jr. was captured when Charleston fell. John Hart was driven from his wife's bedside while she was dying. Their 13 children fled in all directions for their lives. His fields and grist mill were laid waste. For more than a year, he lived in forests and caves and returned home after the war to find his wife dead, his children gone, his properties gone, and he died a few weeks later of exhaustion and a broken heart. Lewis Morris saw his land destroyed, his family scattered. Philip Livingston died within a few months from the hardships of the war. John Hancock, history remembers best due to a quirk of fate rather than anything he stood for. That great sweeping signature attesting to his vanity towers over the others. One of the wealthiest men in New England. And yet he stood outside Boston one terrible night of the war. And he said, "Burn Boston, though it makes John Hancock a beggar, if the public good requires it." So he too lived up to the pledge. Of the 56, few were long to survive. 5 were captured by the British and tortured before they died. 12 had their homes from Rhode Island to Charleston sacked, looted, occupied by the enemy, or burned. 2 lost their sons in the army. 1 had 2 sons captured. 9 of the 56 died in the war from its hardships or from its more merciful bullets. I don't know what impression you had of the men who met that summer in Philadelphia. But I think it's important that we remember this about them. They were not poor men. They were not wild-eyed pirates. These were men of means. They were rich men, most of them, and had enjoyed much ease and luxury in their personal living. Not hungry men, certainly not terrorists, not irresponsible malcontents, not fanatical incendiaries. These men were prosperous men, wealthy landowners. They were substantially secure in their prosperity. They had everything to lose. But they considered liberty, and this is as much as I shall say of it. They had learned that liberty is so much more important than security, that they pledged their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor. And they fulfilled their pledge. They paid the price, and freedom was born.